Good day. I'm Patrick Ryan, your host for Focus KSA. Welcome to our regular monthly session. Focus KSA is sponsored by the Saudi-U.S. Trade Group and Susris.com, the Saudi-U.S. Relations Information Service. Thanks for joining us today. We have a very special program in line on education in Saudi Arabia, and to address that issue and many others, we have with us Ambassador James Smith. He's a senior counselor at the Cohen Group and the former U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia and retired general officer from the U.S. Air Force. We're pleased to have him join us from sunny New Hampshire. He bested us today with the environment, and I'm joining you from Nashville, Tennessee. We have a great program lined up. Our focus will be on evolving education in Saudi Arabia, and as we have Ambassador Smith with us, we'll also touch upon many of the other topics of the day that I'm sure people are interested in his insights and perspectives on. Just a reminder, Focus KSA is brought to you by Susris.com and Sustg, SUSTG.org. You can find more information about our past presentations, what we have on the schedule coming up, and archives of previous Focus KSA sessions by going to Susris.com. That's SUSRIS.com/Focus KSA. And with no further ado, we're going to jump right in and introduce Ambassador Smith, and he's going to provide remarks on the topic of education in Saudi Arabia from his perspective, which was 4 years as the U.S. ambassador and America's top diplomat in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Good morning, Ambassador. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Pat. It's good to be with you. Well, the topic is education in Saudi Arabia. Is it making the grade? And as is the case with most everything in Saudi Arabia, it's a complicated answer. We were supposed to have Dr. Haifa with us this morning, and unfortunately she was not able to make the web conference. But if you're going to look at education in Saudi Arabia, you actually have to start with Dr. Haifa, Princess Lolawa, and the other leadership at EFAD University, and see what they've done over these last few generations. In 1965, the literacy rate of women in Saudi Arabia was 5%. It was King Faisal and Princess EFAD that made a commitment to women's education. EFAD University is a child of that effort. And today you're looking at near 100% literacy rate. 65% of the college students are women. All of this has been done since I was in high school. So if you're going to grade that generation of women like Dr. Haifa, who are the pathfinders in education and medicine and other fields for a young generation of women, all of whom highly educated, then you got to give them an A+. They've met this challenge head on, and with the support of the royal family, and of course the Faisals are behind EFAD, Faisal University, and a lot of the education initiatives in the kingdom. I had the pleasure in end of May to go to the graduation ceremony for Saudi students here in the United States. It was down at the Gaylord in south of Washington. About 10,000 Saudi students graduated this year, and we had about 3,000 of them at that graduation ceremony. It was an amazing event, full of energy, positive young people, parents that were there, proud of what their children, their students had accomplished. It was a seminal event for me to witness just how positive this effort has become. In conjunction with the graduation, we also had a job fair where you had a combination of Saudi companies and U.S. companies that were competing for the very talented students that had graduated from U.S. universities. And it brings to mind the explosion of the King Abdullah Scholarship Program. In 2009, we had about 18,000 Saudi students in the United States. 2002, after 9/11, that had gone down to 3,000. So it had ramped up to 18, and now we have well over 80,000 Saudi students studying here in the United States. That in and of itself is a success story. What many people do not understand is the unique nature of the King Abdullah Scholarship Program, because it is a merit-based program and was developed that way. So it's not populated by students whose parents have influence. It's populated by students that have grades. So in the process of issuing visas, we would find students from all over the country, not just the major urban areas, but students who had excelled in school, and then in a merit-based program, they were awarded scholarships in the King Abdullah Scholarship Program. So very, very important program as you look at the transition in the region over these last 3 to 4 years. About 150,000 Saudi students studying overseas, 83,000 or so in the United States. That's just one part of the higher education program, though, because they have gone from 8 to about 32 universities over the last generation. So you have this explosion of new universities in Saudi Arabia. You have a group of old established universities like King Abdulaziz in Jeddah, King Faisal, King Saud. KFUPM has a long tradition in oil and gas business. King Khalid down in Abha. And these universities are all growing, but then you've got the explosion of new universities. And we had a chance to visit these new universities in Hail and Sakaka, Arar. Qasim is expanding quite a bit. Jazan. And of course, the biggest one of these new universities is, of course, Princess Noura in Riyadh, where you now have 40,000 Saudi women studying in a university that did not exist in 2009. The challenge for Saudi Arabia is that while you've got to acknowledge the commitment to that infrastructure, the easy part is building the building. The challenging part is what's behind the walls. And on this, you'd have to say that the expansion and commitment to education really is in an infant stage, because while you have the facilities being created, the curriculum, all of those things that you need to have a world-class education are still developing. The good news is that a large number of these students studying in the United States and other countries are earmarked to come back to these universities as professors. So the potential is there. It's going to take a while for all of this to evolve and for them to build a world-class higher education system. K through 12 is a real challenge in the kingdom, but it's more complicated than what most people understand. The fact that in Saudi Arabia you have a bridge year between high school and college is a testament to the fact that the K through 12 is not providing the kinds of education that you're required to enter university and to be successful at the university level. And the curriculum is English, Arabic, math, and science. The real challenge inside the K through 12 is you have a system that's focused on rote learning and a culture of obedience. It's not a system that encourages young people to challenge what they're being taught. The curriculum focuses on science and technology, but you're not going to find any courses in comparative philosophy, comparative religion, or courses in world history outside of Saudi history or Islamic history. We know a very talented young woman who got her law degree in England, and she was back here visiting some months ago, and she was sharing a story that she was in London, and she was in a conversation where somebody was talking about World War II. And as she listened to the conversation, she said, well, there must have been a World War I, but she had no idea what it was. It's simply not taught in their system. Now, this too is complicated because in traveling around the country, we would meet with a lot of American teachers who were teaching English at these universities, and they provided a different view of the education system. And it begs the question, if the K through 12 system is so bad, why do Saudi students do so well when they come to university over here? Because less than 7% of Saudi students go home without a degree. That is a remarkable number, especially compared to the number of American students that don't finish. And what they explained is that because of the system of rote learning, Saudi students default to learning something in depth. So if you can get them interested in something, they default to learning it in detail. So they come to the United States and they're exposed to critical thinking, but when they come to university, they default to, again, learning in depth, so they actually do pretty well. Compared to American students, and this is not a binary conversation, I'm talking the extremes, but you could say that American students do survey learning and then challenge everything. Saudi students learn in depth and challenge nothing. The truth is in between somewhere, but again, if you can get a Saudi student energized and passionate about something, their default is to really learn in depth. So the system creates students who will excel. The real issue, the dilemma here, is the issue of critical thinking. And everybody knows this. If Saudi Arabia is going to compete in a global economy, it's got to encourage critical thinking in the education system. If they're going to have a responsive bureaucracy, they've got to be willing to challenge existing processes, which means encouraging critical thinking. And centerpiece to all of this is the transition in the region. And I would argue that before Tahrir Square, the operative word was control. That governments in the region would control where people go, control the media, control what people think, and you can't control anymore because of the advent of the iPhone, the BlackBerry, where people now have access to global information. Information is ubiquitous. So we've moved very quickly from an era of control to one of influence. And the Saudi government made that transition in the spring of 2011 in a very sophisticated way, and has shown an ability to be responsive to what their population was asking. The question for Saudi Arabia, and I can't give them a grade other than incomplete on this, is will Saudi Arabia harness the intellectual capacity of this young generation, or will they default to trying to control it? On this, we're going to have to wait and see. But if Saudi Arabia is to become a world economic power, it is going to have to harness that energy, which means a move toward critical thinking and accepting that critical thinking as a part of their modernization process. Now, Pat, I know that this session was focused on education, not politics in the region, but I don't think you can discuss the education system without examining the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood, who were allowed into the kingdom in the 60s and 70s, the influence that they have had on the education system, that this gave rise to the Salafist movement, which continues to fight modernization every step of the way. Now, clearly there's a cleansing going on. It's most visible in Egypt. In the Emirates, it's been going on for some years, and now Saudi Arabia has focused on the Muslim Brotherhood, declaring it a terrorist organization. But the real issue will be, will there be a cleansing of the Muslim Brotherhood influence, which has a separate agenda than the traditional conservative Najdi tradition. And for those who have traveled in Saudi Arabia, you know that the culture in Abha in the 60s to mid-70s was very open and colorful. The culture you see today is not a traditional Saudi culture. And this is the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood over time. And it will be interesting to see if they're able to do a cleansing inside the kingdom from this influence and then move forward. I will close by saying that there is hope in this because of the appointment of Khalid al-Faisal as the Minister of Education. I don't know that there is a more distinguished man in Saudi Arabia. You know, he was the governor of Syria for nearly 3 decades. He was the governor of Mecca for these past years before his appointment as the Minister of Education. And if there is anybody alive in Saudi Arabia who can affect the change in the K through 12 education system, it will be him, and we're all pinning our hopes on his success.
Yes, indeed, and that was a very interesting development in the leadership changes in the recent times. You talked about critical thinking as being one area, and you identified some specific subject matters in the K-12 curriculum that were absent, and it's a concise readout of where we are. What's your sense of the direction under the new minister? Are they taking on board the critiques that are provided, and I'm sure there's self-examination of what needs to be done to modernize the education? Are the appropriate authorities moving forward in the right direction, do you think?
Well, I think so. Faisal bin Abdullah worked very, very hard at this, and I think he took it the first step. And they had a program in place, Education 2022, which was a modernization effort of the K through 12 curriculum. They changed the curriculum from 21 courses, I think, and 6 of those were religion, and they've consolidated into, and of course the problem is you have 21 courses, that's the first 6 are religion. Guess which gets taught first? They redid the curriculum, I think 7 key course areas, only one of those is religion. So there was a move in that direction. There was a move toward project management, bringing talent from around the world to help advise on how to do this. A lot of people don't realize that all of the textbooks are done by American publishers, Houghton Mifflin and others. So there certainly has been a move in modernization. The curriculum, of course, is science, technology, and that they do very well. We met the dean of the political science department at Abdulaziz University. She doesn't have any students in the women's section because they don't actually teach political science. But if they do, she will be the dean of the university. So the challenge, of course, is a very conservative community gained a foothold in the education system, and this is what they're wrestling with. How do you modernize a country, encourage young people to challenge the status quo when all of your culture has said you've got to control all that? And this is the transition that's going on.
We have a question, and I was going to hold off rolling two questions from the audience and get a few in myself, but George DeBakey asks a couple of questions. One is the role of Tatweer these days, and I'll mention to our audience that we sought representatives to talk specifically about that. And Tatweer is the education holding company in Saudi Arabia. Do you have any comments on where that fits into the curriculum development and standardization and execution of the kingdom's goals in the area of education?
Well, Tatweer was established as a process of excellence in education. We might call them charter schools that are models for how they would transform the rest of the education system. And Tatweer was designed to create standards of excellence. You see now a proliferation of science fairs and competitions where students very publicly are showing success and creativity and innovation. I don't know where that rests right now. It was one of the major innovations that Khalid or Faisal bin Abdullah initiated. I suspect that Prince Khalid will take that to the next level. So that will be the centerpiece of education and excellence.
Let me ask one question. You talked about higher education and the King Abdullah Scholarship Program, which is really a remarkable investment in the future of the kingdom, and the tens of thousands of students enrolled each year and studying for the most part in the United States, but also in the United Kingdom and other destinations around the world. We also have seen in recent years the introduction of the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, KAUST, which is a graduate level experience. But all of these new universities and scholarship programs are exposing young Saudi men and women to cultures and societies and thinking that might have heretofore not been among the experiences and cultural traditions that they have been used to. Can you comment at all about the influence of modernized education on the traditions and culture and social development in the kingdom?
Yeah, that generation of Saudis that came to university in the 60s and 70s, they live very comfortably in different cultures. Saudis, I think, are unique. They very much chameleons in that they can be comfortable in Newport Beach, but also comfortable in Riyadh. What I've found, and it's unfair to start mentioning names, but you look at the Ali Rezas, the Zamals, Khalid al-Turki, Muhammad al-Jasser, these are the people that both publicly and privately are behind a commitment to the success of the kingdom over the long term. These are the guys that push the government to modernize. These are the people that are behind the Saudi Arabian monetary policy, behind the fiscal policy, and are really pushing the kingdom to become great. Again, they do this publicly, as Dr. Jasser did at Sama. They do it privately, as the Zamals and others do, working with disadvantaged people in the kingdom. What I find from them is not so much that they're trying to become Western, but they have reached out and understood different cultures enough to know how to transform their own country in a way to be competitive. In this sense, they're very committed to the future of their own country, and they're not trying to make it like America, but they do know that to be successful over the long term and to have a country 200 years from now, they have got to be competitive in a global economy. So that's the effect that I see them having. So when I look at this new generation, I would predict something similar. It's not an issue of them trying to adapt our culture. It's an issue of them making Saudi Arabia more competitive over the long term. But then this begs a real question, Pat, which is, what do you do with the education? And I'm a great advocate of the King Abdullah Scholarship Program. I think it's perhaps the most forward-thinking initiative in the kingdom. The only thing that's even remotely close to the investment was the GI Bill here in the United States after World War II. And if you look at the success of that, this took a generation of soldiers, and they either took a stipend and bought their farm or what a business, or they went to university. And they were behind the explosion of our economic development in the 50s and then the 60s. Behind that was the GI Bill. The potential is there for Saudi Arabia to do the same thing, but they've got to take advantage of this, and this is where the idea of critical thinking comes in. And I think KAUST right now is going to be an interesting model to look at to see if they're able to capitalize on it. Huge investment in KAUST. I've visited many times, have admiration for the investment, for the physical plant, for the commitment to hiring global experts in all areas. But there's a fence around it. And the average Saudi has no idea what's going on inside because of the criticism of the conservative community about KAUST, which was really a byproduct of gender integration in graduate school,
right,
which is what all their students do when they go overseas, by the way. And by the way, even in Saudi Arabia, in the medical education is all gender integrated. But because of that, they built a fence around KAUST, and it's isolated. So they're not taking advantage of the commitment to KAUST because nobody understands it. And you're hearing more and more from other Saudi educators why the investment in this castle over there when we have all these other needs at, quote, our universities. KAUST should be a model for what they're aspiring to. A graduate level university that focus on science and technology, an MIT triangle, if you will, where you're bringing in IP from all sorts of other companies, you're doing joint research, and then you're spinning that research off on your own intellectual property to create new business. It's really the MIT triangle. It's very difficult for that triangle to be successful if it's isolated from the rest of the country. So now the question is, are you going to be open to critical thinking? Are you going to be open to these new ideas? Are you going to take advantage of that immense investment? And right now, we don't know.
Well, I'll mention to our viewers that 2 months ago in our regular Focus KSA webinar, we talked about the issue of labor and the question of the utilization of graduates from the King Abdullah Scholarship Program and Saudi domestic universities and places like KAUST was on the table. So I'd refer people to take a look at that webinar, which is in the archives at susris.com/Focus KSA. We had a distinguished panel which included Mr. Amr Khashoggi, the economist John Sfakianicus from Riyadh, and Nathan Field from Washington. And we examined that issue, and it's clearly tied to the education question when you produce so many highly qualified and talented graduates from these programs. How are they going to fit in the labor market? And there's the question of the private public sector where Saudi graduates seek to find positions, and it seems to be heavily weighted in the public sector as opposed to small and medium enterprises and so forth. So that's clearly an issue that's welded with the education program, as you pointed out. What to do with the graduates? Let me remind our audience that you've tuned in to Focus KSA, which is a webinar program sponsored by the Saudi U.S. Trade Group and the susris.com project. We hope that you are subscribers to the newsletters of SUSTIG, the news review, probably the best summary every day in your inbox of what's happening in the region and in Saudi Arabia, as well susris.com, where we provide you articles, interviews, and other materials to keep you up to date with what's happening in the U.S.-Saudi relationship. And we're talking today with Ambassador James Smith, who served as ambassador to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia from 2009 to 2013. He's joining us from the sunny climes of New Hampshire, and many of us are envious of the New England summertime. We have two questions, Ambassador, that are related. Joyce Partamian asks for your comments on the question of e-learning. She's curious how e-learning might fit in to the evolution in Saudi Arabia, especially for women. And Joyce is connected with the Blackboard enterprise. And we also have a question. George DeBakey had a second question. He wanted your comments on the opportunities for business in such areas as e-books, online education, and English language programs. I know you were a vigorous supporter of the business-to-business community. We last spoke at the U.S. Saudi Business Opportunities Forum in Los Angeles, and I think no one knows better how to get Americans and Saudis connected in business than you do. Can you touch on the subjects of e-learning, online education, and business opportunities for American business people in the education sector?
Well, there's a lot of that that's already going on, and I mean, Blackboard is there. It's being used at I know several of the universities. I think the Saudi education leadership is wrestling with e-learning in much the same way that we are. That on one hand, it's accessible, cost-effective, and you can reach a wider audience. It's flexible. So there are some real advantages to it. There's some interesting models evolving, and that's why people are wrestling with what the right model is. You've got a University of Phoenix model, which is all online. You've got the University of New Hampshire, which has a very creative model of blending a brick and mortar university with e-learning and the ability to go back and forth. They've also established a program which I would call more training than education, but a company will come in and say, I need 100 employees that are trained in these skills. And they're providing a competency-based education. And the argument that people make is, I hire English majors, but they can't write. I'd much rather have somebody that can write than somebody that's got an English major. So I think what we're going to have to do with the Saudi education system is kind of figure out what the right mix is. There is an advantage to having a young man in class where you can look into his eye and say that and understand that he's paying attention. My mother was a teacher for 40 years. We understand the value of moving a young man from the back row to the front row. I was there many times myself. On the other hand, those who are experienced in e-learning will tell you that the one-on-one connection, even though it's virtual, between an instructor and a professor and a student, is much more focused on online education than it is in a classroom, especially if you're doing one of these core courses where you've got 200 people in an auditorium. So I think the one challenge with e-learning in Saudi Arabia is that they have not yet accepted the value of adult education. That you have K through 12 and you have university and then you go to work. This notion of a 40-year-old retooling themselves because they're doing online or education as a mid-career person doesn't exist yet. And I think the real value in e-learning is going to be in creating that kind of business model, especially as it's focused on entrepreneurship and business. We look at the opportunities for young women, and entrepreneurship is one of those growth areas, because if I give a businesswoman a website, a credit card, and the ability to have her products delivered the next day, then she doesn't have to do physical business with a man across the counter, but what you've done is connected her to the global economy.
Sure.
E-commerce creates opportunities that bypass these cultural arguments. So you're going to see an explosion on that. It was interesting at the graduation that I spoke about earlier that I went to a class that was presented by a very senior person in the Ministry of Education who gave a presentation on entrepreneurship. They're encouraging graduates not to go into government. And the comment was made, the public sector is unsustainable in its current form. This said by a senior government official. So now they're encouraging students to start thinking about opening their own business and being entrepreneurs and being creative and take advantage of the education they got here to create a new economy. I suspect that e-learning and e-commerce are going to be central to that, because it creates a education and business opportunity that again can bypass some of the cultural impediments to be able to do those same things. And there certainly are opportunities for business. I would encourage Joyce and George both to connect with the Foreign Commercial Service at the embassy, Amr Kayani's group, who are incredibly effective at connecting American businessmen and businesswomen to Saudi businessmen and businesswomen.
I'll put another plug in here. We just most recently our last regular session of Focus KSA was on Saudi trade investment, and Minister Counselor Kayani was one of our guests, along with Ambassador Ford Fraker, and that, as well as all the other Focus KSAs, can be found in the archives. So we hope that we're touching all the bases, and we appreciate the segue leading into that. Again, a reminder to our audience: this is Focus KSA, the Saudi U.S. Trade Group, and Sutras.com. Ambassador, at the opening of your remarks, you mentioned Dr. Haifa, and to our audience who may have signed in at an earlier announcement when she was listed as a panelist. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to join us today, but anyone who has any experience at FAT College and now FAT University understands the remarks that you made lauding the performance of that institution, and as well the advancement of women in education in just the past few decades. Any comments? We're going to segue out of education, but any comments that you'd like to make about the role of education for women in modernizing the position of women in Saudi society?
Well, I think most people who focus on Saudi Arabia know the great advances in education. I will tell just one story. I was honored to be the commencement speaker at FAT in 2010, which is fairly unusual, being a man at a women's university, or I thought it was unusual. But they invited me because the embassy had worked with them 5 years before to help set up a curriculum for engineering. So FAT had the first engineering department for women in Saudi Arabia, and then the first graduating class of women engineers. It was not completely well received because there were fathers that wanted daughters to go into more traditional education, and I happened to meet one of those students here this spring, and I said, well, how are things going? And she smiled and she said, well, at first there was just a handful of us. Now women are being pushed into the engineering program because we all got jobs. That
can be a difference maker, especially among up-and-coming college graduates.
I will add one more thing to that, Pat, and I got to give credit to Al Jaber, Ambassador Jaber, who both of us committed ourselves to try to start internship programs for Saudi students here in the United States. And there's a broad range of American companies that are doing that. And the idea is you give an internship just like you would an American student between sophomore and junior year, and then between junior and senior year. And this is somebody you would want to hire in your company. You hold them over after graduation, give them the 3 to 6 month program to learn the company culture and whatnot, and then deploy them back to Saudi Arabia as a part of your enterprise, as an entry-level manager, engineer, human resources, whatever. And the idea is, if you want to stay there for the rest of your career, that's fine. If you want to do that 3 to 5 years and then come to the States or to Europe or to Asia, we can give you a job in a global company with a lifelong commitment to training and education that goes with that. It's a value proposition that American companies have that almost nobody else does. And a lot of people are taking advantage of that. Nala Jaber over at Saudi Arabia Cultural Mission is the spearhead for the program here in the United States, and we're showing great success in that.
That answers a question unasked so far from C. Sater, who asked about internship opportunities, and I know that you talked about the graduation ceremony at Gaylord, and that was accompanied by a job fair, career fair,
Right.
and there's been a lot of discussion about the American companies that are doing business, and I think my colleague Richard Wilson at the Saudi U.S. Trade Group has mentioned that in our conversation about Saudi trade and investment, that he suggested American businesses that wanted a leg up look at some of these Saudi students here in the States for internships, both to get involved in some networking and also to take advantage of their cultural and just perspectives and insights that an American business person wouldn't have about how things are done in the kingdom. So it's a plus for both sides, the business people and for the students to get involved in programs of that nature. Let me just on the education topic, you had mentioned Princess Nora University, and anybody who's driven from the airport to downtown in Riyadh has seen the spectacular scope of that campus. And as you mentioned, it's got over 40,000 students. It's one of the 10 largest in the world. Have you visited the campus when it was being built and opened? I believe that was largely during your tenure in Riyadh. Do you have any firsthand experience there?
Yeah, it was opened in 2009. I had the chance to visit the university. I was there for the opening. That was the event that King Abdullah used to announce that women were going to be allowed in the Shura Council, that women were going to be allowed to vote and run for office in the next election cycle, 2015. So Princess Nora University got a lot of visibility. I think it's facing the same challenges that any university that starts from nothing and now has 40,000 students to deal with. And I mean, I certainly wish them success. The rector of the university is exceptionally talented.
We've got a brief video freeze, and while the internet is restored with Ambassador Smith in New Hampshire, I'll mention this is Focus KSA, a production of the Saudi U.S. Trade Group and Susris.com. Ambassador, you're back with us. We lost you about your comments on the challenges Nora faces.
Yeah, I think it's typical of any university that starts from nothing, which they were in 2009, to 40,000 students. And it runs a gamut of attracting world-class faculty, curriculum development, and all of the issues that any university would face. It I think is going to be a real positive over the long term, though, because again, if you go back a generation, none of these women would probably have gone to university. It is I think you would call it a state school that is access from a broad base of students, maybe not as elite as King Saud or Darul Hikmah or Efat, but these are all women that, again, a generation ago would not have gone to school. And we talk often about the advantage of or the impact of going abroad for university. Most people miss the reality that if young women at this university are now going to spend 5 years, a bridge year and 4 years of school, thrown together with other women, different ideas, each has their own cell phone, iPhone, BlackBerry, and it's a 5-year immersion in ideas. That is as powerful as the issue of sending students abroad.
Terrific. We're going to shift our attention from education, but